A little girl called 911 and asked, "Does every old man do this?" The line went quiet. When the cop and his K9 partner arrived, the bus was stopped in the snow, the driver motionless, eyes blank, and the girl nowhere to be seen. At first, everyone feared the worst, but what they found would break the town's heart and change how they looked at silence forever. Could this happen in your town too? Drop a yes in the comments if you believe every truth deserves to be heard, even the ones hidden behind quiet eyes. Snow Ridge, Colorado, sat nestled between pine-covered slopes, cloaked in silence beneath the season's fresh onslaught. It was early January, the kind of morning that looked beautiful from a window, but stung the lungs the second you stepped outside. Overnight, a foot of snow had fallen, smoothing every edge of the small town, until mailboxes looked like iced cakes and street signs leaned under their white burdens. The sun rose reluctantly over the mountains, its light bright but hollow, sharp without warmth. By 7 a.m., the town was already stirring in its quiet, disciplined rhythm, the hiss of snow shovels, the crunch of boots, and the low grumble of school buses warming up in driveways. In a place like Snow Ridge, where everyone knew everyone, any deviation from routine struck like a warning bell. And that morning, it came in the form of a whispered question into a dispatch line. "Does every old man do this?" The voice was small, a girl's. "He did it again," she said. "I jumped out. Please don't be mad." Then the line cut off. At the Snow Ridge Sheriff's substation, Officer Cole Danner grabbed his coat before the dispatcher even called his name. At 38, Cole was tall and broad-shouldered, built like a man who still carried things that couldn't be put down. His hair was dark and clipped short, streaked at the temples with gray that had nothing to do with age. Faint scars ran just beneath his right cheek and over the bridge of his nose, remnants of a roadside explosion during his second tour in Iraq. He moved with the quiet precision of someone trained to react before asking questions. Cole wasn't alone. As he strode to the door, his K9 partner, Shadow, rose silently from under the desk. The German Shepherd's coat was a rich charcoal black with flecks of brown beneath his jaw and paws. Shadow had sharp, intelligent eyes and the posture of a soldier at attention. Loyal, alert, always waiting for a command. The bond between them had been forged in fire. Shadow had saved Cole's life once, and neither had ever really stopped watching the other since. Dispatch confirmed the source of the call, a number registered to Evelyn Miller, a retired librarian on Maple Street. The girl must have used her grandmother's phone. Cole and Shadow climbed into the patrol SUV, tires crunching over frozen gravel as they sped down the main road. Sunlight bounced off the white streets, creating a glare that forced Cole to squint. The morning felt too still. Just before the turnoff to Maple, Cole spotted the bus hash 42. It was pulled halfway off the shoulder, parked at a haphazard angle that didn't match any scheduled stop. The side mirrors reflected the empty snow-covered road, and the door hung open slightly, rocking in the wind. Steam puffed from the rear exhaust, curling into the cold morning air. Something was wrong. Cole slowed the cruiser, eyes scanning the scene as he reached for the door handle. Shadow was already alert, standing tall in the back seat, ears forward. And then they saw him. Frank Delaney stood next to the bus. He didn't look dangerous. If anything, he looked tired. He was a man of about 58, tall but slightly stooped, his shoulders sloped as if the uniform weighed more than it should. His hair was silver, not from style, but from time and memory. It curled slightly behind his ears beneath a dark knit cap. His face was pale and deeply lined, with sunken eyes the color of glacial water. His mouth was drawn in a line so tight it seemed like he hadn't spoken in hours. He wore the standard Snow Ridge school transportation jacket, zipped to his neck, with thick winter gloves that looked too big for his long, bony fingers. He was standing perfectly still, not looking at the bus, not looking at the road, just staring off. Cole brought the cruiser to a stop. Shadow let out a low, uncertain whine. Cole stepped out slowly, letting the door click shut behind him. The snow came up over his boots. "Mr. Delaney?" he called, his breath fogging. No response. The man didn't flinch. His eyes didn't move. It was like he'd turned to stone. Cole approached carefully, noting the bus's engine still running, the open door, the absence of movement inside. Something prickled in the back of his mind. Training, maybe, or instinct. But it told him that whatever had happened here, it wasn't over. He glanced toward the surrounding houses, snow-covered porches, quiet windows. No sign of the girl. "Shadow," he said. The dog leapt from the SUV, landing silently beside him. Cole motioned toward the nearby fences. Shadow sniffed the air, then darted off toward a narrow side yard lined with a white picket fence. Cole reached the side of the bus. He didn't go in. Not yet. His eyes returned to Frank Delaney, who still hadn't blinked. The man's jaw worked slightly, like he was chewing a thought he couldn't swallow. His gloves twitched once, then nothing. The street was silent except for the soft hum of the idling engine and the faint click of the turning signal, blinking into nowhere. In that moment, Cole didn't see a school bus driver. He saw a man frozen in some terrible place between now and then. And the little girl's words echoed again in his mind. "Does every old man do this?" Cole didn't know what this was yet, but whatever it was, it had been enough to make a child leap from a moving bus into the snow, and now that child was missing. Tires crunched behind him, another car pulling up, maybe a concerned neighbor. But Cole didn't turn around. His eyes were fixed on Frank Delaney, a man with silver hair and hollow eyes, standing statue still beside a running school bus, the door hanging open like a question no one wanted to ask. The snow continued to fall in tiny, whispering flakes, each one burying the tracks just a little more. A silence had settled, heavy, waiting. And all Cole could think was, he was too late. The sound came first, a muffled bark, quick and sharp, followed by the crunch of snow under padded paws. Cole turned his head just as Shadow bolted toward the far side of the road, where a white picket fence curved around the yard of a small pale blue house. The dog paused near a hedge, tail low and stiff, then let out a second, softer bark. Cole followed. The fence belonged to Mrs. Flora Peterson, a retired elementary school teacher in her early 70s, who had lived in Snow Ridge all her life. Her home was modest, with faded wind chimes and an overgrown winter garden dusted in snow. Through the frost-fogged glass of her window, her silhouette appeared briefly, shoulders hunched, one hand clutching a steaming mug, then vanished behind drawn curtains. Cole rounded the fence, hand low at his belt, his other resting lightly on Shadow's collar. Huddled in a patch of snow behind the hedges was a small figure, motionless except for the rise and fall of her breath. Her knees were drawn to her chest. A worn, stuffed rabbit lay clutched under one arm, its ears tattered and a button eye missing. "Lila Grace?" Cole knelt beside her, lowering his voice. The girl flinched, but she didn't bolt. Her eyes were wide, brown and watery, her cheeks blotched red from the cold. Freckles dotted her nose and upper cheeks, half hidden under a fringe of tangled chestnut curls matted against a pink wool hat that had slipped sideways. Her coat, a faded green double-breasted thing with 3 missing buttons, was dusted in snow. She looked like a child sculpted from porcelain and fear. "I didn't mean to make trouble," she whispered, but he froze again, just like before. Cole nodded slowly, not pressing yet. "You did the right thing calling us. Can you tell me what happened?" Lila's lip trembled. "He was driving like normal. Then we passed the flags again, and he stopped. Not like a stop, more like something hit him inside. He didn't blink. He didn't talk. He gripped the wheel like it was choking him. His mouth moved, but no sound came out." Cole felt his chest tighten. "What did he say?" "I don't know. It wasn't real words, like whispers, like when my uncle talks in his sleep. Then he started shaking. His hand hit the mirror. I thought—" She stopped. "I thought maybe he was dying." Shadow let out a quiet huff, sitting between them now, his head low, watching the girl with a steady gaze. Lila blinked at him, then reached out, placing a cold hand on the side of the dog's neck. Shadow didn't move. "He's warm," she murmured. "Yes, he is," Cole said. "And so are you now. We'll get you inside soon. But I need to know, has this happened before?" She nodded. "Last week. The same place, right past the cemetery. He stared out the window for so long, I thought we'd never move again." Cole stood and radioed for medical support and backup, quietly, carefully, not wanting to set off panic in case Mrs. Peterson or others were watching from their windows. Then he looked toward the bus again. He hadn't heard of Frank Delaney having health issues, but he had always been quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that held 1,000 echoes. Cole stepped back across the street. Inside the bus, Shadow sniffed along the driver's seat and under it, tail twitching. He let out a low growl and nosed at a compartment near the floor. Cole opened it and found a cloth pouch, military green and weathered. Inside, a small bottle of diazepam with a Veterans Clinic label, 3 months expired. Cole exhaled, slow and heavy. He turned to Frank, still seated at the top step of the bus, now with his head in his hands. Cole knelt beside him. "You served?" he asked softly. Frank blinked. "Fallujah, twice." Cole nodded. "I was in Haditha. Lost 3 men. I still hear them at night." Frank looked up, something shifting in his hollow blue eyes. Recognition. Shame. And then something deeper. Relief. "I didn't hurt her," he said. "I swear to God." Cole nodded again. "I believe you. But you scared her, Frank. She thought you were dying behind the wheel. She jumped out because she thought that was safer." Frank's shoulders sagged. "It's just the cemetery. When I see the flags, sometimes I forget which side of the world I'm on." Cole glanced back toward the flags, the ones planted in icy ground, fluttering even when the air didn't move. "How long's this been happening?" "A few months," Frank admitted. "Sometimes I take the pills, sometimes I don't. I thought I could handle it. But last week she looked at me like I was a ghost." Cole stood. "You're not a ghost, Frank. But you're breaking." And no one noticed. Not the school, not your supervisor, no one. Frank looked away. Back across the street, a silver sedan pulled up in front of the blue house. Evelyn Miller, Lila's grandmother, stepped out. She was a compact woman in her late 60s with shoulder-length silver hair tucked into a red knit scarf. Her skin was pale, her nose pink from cold and worry. She moved with surprising energy, bundled in a navy overcoat, and carried a large canvas tote slung over one shoulder. She saw Cole, then saw Lila in Shadow's care, and her steps quickened. "Baby!" she called, half running through the snow. Lila stood, stumbling a little, but caught by Shadow, who braced himself like a wall of fur. Evelyn scooped the girl into her arms, whispering reassurances, glancing once at the bus with a glare that could crack glass. Cole walked over slowly. "She's all right," he said gently. "She left me a note," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "Said she might have to call someone, that she was worried the driver might fall asleep or collapse again. I thought she meant tired. I didn't realize it was worse than that." Cole gave her a small nod. She was right to be worried, but this isn't what it looks like. She studied his face, then looked down at Shadow, who now sat calmly between them, tail sweeping softly. Her expression softened. "You're the officer with the war dog, right? From the Veterans Hall?" "Yes, ma'am. Shadow and I served together." She looked toward the bus. "And him. Same war, different battles, but maybe same ghosts." For a moment, neither said anything. Just the whisper of snow falling again. Across the road, Frank Delaney, a man with silver hair, hollow eyes, and an untold weight, sat on the steps of a school bus, unmoving, while a little girl's footprints melted slowly behind the white picket fence she had hidden behind. And for anyone watching, for anyone who didn't know better, it still looked like he had done something terrible. By late afternoon, the snowfall had lightened, but the clouds above Snow Ridge still hung heavy and gray, pressing low like a warning. Officer Cole Danner stood at the edge of the school district's small transportation lot, arms crossed, eyes narrowed against the light reflecting off the snow-covered ground. The yellow frame of Bus 42 sat alone beneath a corrugated shelter, its windows fogged, engine silent. Despite its stillness, it felt like it was still watching him. Shadow sat beside him, tail sweeping slowly across the pavement, ears perked. Cole had spent the morning reviewing route logs, GPS records, and surveillance snapshots from various intersections. He wasn't looking for wrongdoing anymore. He was mapping behavior, searching for repetition. The map that emerged was subtle, but it was there. Over the past 2 months, Frank Delaney had made brief, unexplained stops on 6 separate occasions. Each stop had one thing in common. There were no children left on the bus. Each stop also aligned with a point on the edge of town, isolated turns near the old water tower, a side street that ran parallel to the Veterans Cemetery, and the edge of the decommissioned train yard, places with no witnesses. At first glance, it had seemed ominous, but with what he now knew, the stops looked less like predatory habits and more like escape routes. Cole climbed onto bus 42, Shadow following without hesitation. The air inside was stale, still holding a faint trace of childhood. Fruit snacks, worn vinyl seats, the must of winter boots. Cole's boots thudded dully on the floor as he moved to the driver's seat. Shadow sniffed the edges of the cab, his snout pressed against the cracks near the pedals and beneath the seat. Then he stopped and looked up, ears flat. Cole leaned down. A loose panel beneath the seat creaked slightly at his touch. He tugged it open and found a small wooden box tucked inside, wrapped in an olive drab cloth. He placed it on the seat gently and opened the lid. Inside were items too deliberate to be trash and too personal to be forgotten. A sand-colored wristband with faded embroidery, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. A flattened photo, Frank, barely 30, arms around 2 younger men in full combat gear, their faces sunburned and grinning. A bronze medal in a velvet pouch, worn at the corners, and a child's drawing, crumpled but carefully folded, with a smiling bus, red hearts, and the words, "Thank you, Mr. D." Cole exhaled, slow. These weren't trophies, they were anchors. Behind him, the bus door opened with a soft hiss. Cole turned to see a new figure stepping inside. Carla Mejia was in her mid-40s, the district transportation coordinator. She was short and solidly built, with broad shoulders and dark hair pulled into a tidy bun. Her olive skin was flush from the cold, and her tone was brisk but not unkind. "He didn't sign out," she said by way of greeting. "You have any idea what's going on?" "Did Frank ever request time off?" Cole asked, ignoring the question. Carla frowned. "He asked back in October. Said he needed a few weeks for medical leave. But we were short 3 drivers. I told him if he left, I'd have to double his route with someone else. I thought he understood that meant no." "He said anything else?" She shifted, defensive now. "He looked tired. I assumed it was just age catching up. He's quiet, keeps to himself. Never once had a complaint on his record." She glanced toward the box. "What's that?" "Memories," Cole said. "Ones no one ever asked him about." Carla's mouth pressed into a line, but she didn't respond. Cole packed the items back into the box, then stood. "When was the last time you reviewed his GPS logs?" "Last year, maybe. We only check if there's a report." "There should have been." He stepped off the bus, Shadow following close behind, and Carla trailed in silence. That evening, back at the sheriff's substation, Cole laid the box on his desk and pulled out a large county map. He marked the 6 strange stop locations in red ink, drawing lines between them. They created a semicircle around one spot in the center, the Snow Ridge Veterans Cemetery. He turned to Shadow, who was sprawled near the heater. "Every time it's when he passes those flags," Cole said aloud. "That's the trigger." He called Evelyn Miller next. The older woman picked up on the 3rd ring. "Yes?" "Mrs. Miller, I'm following up about Lila. She's asleep, worn out, but safe. I need to ask about something she said earlier. Last week, did she mention anything strange about Frank's behavior?" "She wrote in her journal that he's lit away." "That was her phrase. I didn't understand it then. I thought it meant he forgot something or was just old, but she said he looked out the window like he saw something we couldn't." "She ever say what?" "Just that it made her sad, like watching someone disappear." Cole thanked her and hung up. He stared at the map again. His own memories were crawling back. The convoys, the heat, the silence after an explosion. He remembered a man named Brewer, older, always steady, who broke down after watching a dog run across a street in Baghdad. Said it reminded him of his farm back in Iowa. A week later, Brewer locked himself in a Humvee and wouldn't come out. Sometimes, Cole thought, the worst pain isn't loud. It's silent, invisible until it bursts. The next morning, Cole stopped by the local VFW hall before sunrise. A handful of old-timers were nursing coffee and cigarettes in a dim corner of the main room. One of them, a tall black man with a heavy limp and voice like gravel, was named Reuben Griggs, a Vietnam vet with a chest full of medals and a quiet air of earned respect. "You know Frank Delaney?" Cole asked. Reuben looked up. "Yeah, doesn't talk much. Lost 2 boys in Fallujah. One was his driver." "You ever see him after a route?" "Sometimes. He parks by the cemetery and just sits. Never goes in. Just sits in the lot, staring." Cole nodded. You think he's dangerous? Reuben asked quietly. No, Cole said, but he's drowning and nobody sees it. Reuben reached into his pocket and handed over a small pin, a gold star on a field of black. Give him this. Maybe he'll talk to someone if he knows someone remembers. By the time Cole drove back to the lot, the snow had begun again, soft and light. Bus 42 sat where it had before, still, waiting. Inside, Frank Delaney, a man with years in his bones and ghosts in his eyes, sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, watching the flags rise through the snowfall like memories returning. The next morning broke with a bitter clarity. The sun, pale and hesitant, peeked over the snow-draped rooftops of Snow Ridge. Everything glistened under a thin crust of overnight frost, and the streets were quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of boots and the rhythmic hiss of snow shovels, the kind of morning where memories felt closer than breath. At 7:10 a.m., Evelyn Miller stood at her front porch, wrapped in a long caramel-colored wool coat that reached her calves. A patterned scarf, hand-knitted and faded at the edges, hung loosely from her neck. Her silver hair was clipped back, revealing a face creased by worry and softened by wisdom. In her hands was a small spiral notebook with a unicorn sticker peeling from the corner. She had found it tucked beneath the porch stairs, half covered by a thin sheet of snow, likely dropped when Lila fled the school bus the morning before. Evelyn dusted it off with her gloves and began to read under the dim porch light. Each page was written in a mix of printed words and shaky cursive, the kind a child learns slowly and carefully. Some entries were just drawings, Lila and Mr. Frank in the bus, or a stick figure shadow with a wagging tail, but others were sentences that made Evelyn's heart clench. If Mr. Frank gets dizzy again, what do I do? Sometimes he talks without words. I think his brain goes to sleep. He looks like Grandpa did the month before he died, like he's watching someone else's TV. If the bus goes off the road, can I climb out the window? He never yells, but he disappears. I don't want him to disappear forever. Evelyn pressed her lips together and stepped inside. Her living room was still decorated with mismatched furniture from the 80s, floral couches, a sagging recliner, and framed cross-stitch sayings on the wall. She placed the notebook gently on the kitchen table, then picked up the phone. Meanwhile, at the sheriff's substation, Officer Cole Danner sat hunched over a collection of printed incident reports. The radiator near his desk hissed and clanked, the room warm but stifling. He had already finished his second cup of coffee and was halfway through a granola bar when the call came through from Evelyn. She's not afraid of him, Evelyn said firmly. She was afraid for him. That's a different kind of fear. I think you need to see this notebook. Cole drove over within the hour, Shadow in the passenger seat, his head poking out slightly through the lowered window despite the cold. The dog's breath clouded the glass in short bursts. His body was alert. He knew the tension in Cole's shoulders now meant something important was ahead. Inside the house, Evelyn handed over the notebook. Cole sat down and read page after page, his brows tightening. Has she said any of this to you? He asked. She's tried. I think she didn't know how, Evelyn said. And I didn't know how to listen. Cole ran a hand down his beard. She saw a man coming apart, and all she could do was try to prepare for it. That's too much for a little girl. She's only 9, Evelyn said quietly. But she's seen a lot. Her father left when she was a baby. Her mother's barely in her life. Frank was the one stable man she saw every week. I think she started seeing him as a substitute grandfather. Cole nodded, flipping one last page. On it, Lila had written, Mr. Frank smells like winter and coffee. Grandpa used to, too. After leaving Evelyn's, Cole returned to the department and began digging deeper. There were no criminal complaints against Frank, no reprimands in his file, but in an archived report from 11 months earlier, Cole found a single thin incident form submitted by an after-school supervisor named Becky Tran. The report was brief. Driver of bus 42 was observed slumped forward for several seconds after route ended. When approached, he claimed he was just tired, declined offer of medical assistance. Cole frowned. The timestamp was from February of the previous year. He tracked down Becky Tran, now working part-time at the Snow Ridge Community Clinic. Becky was in her late 20s, with short black hair that spiked around her ears and warm brown eyes magnified slightly by thin-rimmed glasses. She wore a bright yellow hoodie under a quilted jacket, and her voice carried a firm, no-nonsense tone. "I remember that day," she said when Cole arrived. "It scared the hell out of me. He was frozen at the wheel, like he'd stopped existing. Then he blinked and said something about the sun being too low, and got up like nothing happened." "Did you report it to the school?" "Yeah, filled out the form and dropped it in the admin box. That's all we were told to do. Never heard anything back." Cole nodded slowly. "Did you notice anything else? Did he ever say anything strange?" Becky thought for a moment. "He mentioned a doctor once. Said the VA clinic was booked out for months. I offered to help him call, but he smiled and said, 'I'm used to waiting.'" Cole left the clinic and returned to the station, where he checked the correspondence log for the school district. There, buried in scanned PDFs, was a letter from Nurse Sarah Klein, a local RN who volunteered with the town's veteran support group. Her letter, dated 8 months ago, had been addressed to the school superintendent and recommended that Frank Delaney be given temporary leave for mental health treatment. In her letter, Sarah described Frank's behavior as indicative of complex PTSD, marked by dissociative episodes and memory gaps. She noted that he had shown signs of confusion and fatigue and urged the district to act. There was no response attached, no follow-up, just a digital stamp. Filed, no action taken. Cole leaned back, the weight of the town's silence beginning to settle heavily across his shoulders. Snow Ridge was not a cruel place, but it was tired, understaffed, overlooked, good intentions drowned in red tape and busy calendars. And somehow, in all the noise, a man like Frank had slipped through. That evening, as the wind picked up again and snow returned in soft spirals, Cole sat on his porch, notebook in hand, shadow curled at his feet. He didn't speak, just read Lila's words again. "Maybe Mr. Frank is lost in his own story," she had written on one page, "and no one knows how to find him." Cole exhaled, breath fogging the cold air, and whispered, "We do now, Lila. We do now." Snow Ridge Elementary was an aging building, red brick, faded white trim, and windows that rattled with every winter gust. The snow had thickened overnight, painting the schoolyard with fresh, untouched powder, though tire tracks and scattered footprints told their own chaotic story. Officer Cole Danner parked beside the frosted faculty entrance, shadow at his side, tail wagging lazily but eyes alert. Inside the main office, the heater hummed overhead, battling against the sharp cold that bled through the double-paned windows. The scent of burnt coffee and lemon-scented disinfectant filled the air. Behind the front desk sat Marlene Jensen, a petite woman in her 60s with cat-eye glasses and a woolen shawl draped over her shoulders like armor. Her face was tight, cautious. Cole greeted her with a nod. "Marlene, need to take a look at your transport incident logs and access to Bus 42's dash cam." Marlene hesitated. "We're not in the habit of sharing internal recordings without administrative approval." Cole held up his badge. "I'm not asking for policy, Marlene. I'm asking for safety. A child ran off that bus in panic, and your driver may be suffering from untreated trauma. I'm trying to understand what happened." Marlene softened, albeit reluctantly, and buzzed him through the inner door. The school's server room was a cramped, overheated space on the second floor. There, Cole met Mason Liu, a tech coordinator in his early 30s, wiry and twitchy, with short-cropped black hair and a nervous smile. His office was a mess of tangled cables, half-open laptops, and a microwave meal slowly congealing on a side table. "You want Bus 42? Mason asked, tapping keys rapidly. "Sure. We store about 30 days of footage before it gets wiped. Lucky timing." He clicked through a list and opened a folder labeled Feb_records_42. The camera feed sprang to life, angled from the front of the bus, capturing both the aisle and a sliver of the driver's profile. As the footage played, Cole's eyes narrowed. There they were, 3 boys seated near the back, 8th graders by the look of them, dressed in oversized jackets and knit beanies. One had a handheld Bluetooth speaker poking from his backpack's side pocket. The timestamp blinked, 7:22 a.m. Snow blurred the windows. Frank sat at the wheel, steady but quiet. Then it came. A harsh, low-frequency rumble burst from the speaker, like an explosion in a war film. It wasn't loud enough to be heard from outside, but it echoed through the cabin with sharp clarity. Frank flinched, his shoulders jerking. His hand twitched on the wheel. The boys stifled giggles. Seconds later, Frank pulled the bus over to the shoulder and sat, frozen. His lips moved, but there was no sound. His eyes stared straight ahead, haunted. Another video, a different day. Same sound, same boys, same reaction. Cole exhaled, jaw clenched. Shadow, sensing the shift in energy, pressed his head against Cole's thigh, a silent anchor. Cole clicked pause and turned to Mason. Download all of these. I want timestamps, names of the kids, and dates they rode this route. Back in his patrol SUV, Cole contacted Principal Diana Hartley. Diana was in her late 40s, with a composed demeanor and neatly pinned auburn hair. Her tone on the phone was formal, even cool. I'm concerned this behavior hasn't been addressed, Cole said. There's clear evidence of harassment that triggered a PTSD response. The driver's been medically vulnerable for months. There was a pause on the line. We were aware Mr. Delaney had difficulty, Diana said carefully. But we also have limited options, Officer Danner. We're short-staffed, and school liability is a very sensitive area. You ignored symptoms to avoid lawsuits, Cole said bluntly. We didn't ignore, we managed what we could within policy. Cole ended the call with a sigh and stared out across the snowy lot. Policy. Always the wall between care and consequence. That evening, he returned to his cabin on the southern edge of town. It was modest, 2 bedrooms, wood stove heat, and a porch covered in firewood and frozen dog bowls. Shadow hopped down from the truck and ran in small circles, shaking snow from his coat. Inside, Cole sat at his kitchen table, footage replaying silently on his laptop. He picked up his phone and called his old friend, Clara Monroe, a retired Army medic now working at the Denver Veteran Support Center. Clara was in her mid-50s, sharp-eyed and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair always tied back. She'd served 2 tours and had seen more broken men than she cared to count. You think he can still be helped? Cole asked, after sharing the situation. PTSD doesn't vanish, Cole, but the earlier we intervene, the better the chances he doesn't spiral, Clara replied. Get me his file. I'll pull what strings I can. The next day, Cole submitted a full report to the Snow Ridge Town Council and copied the superintendent's office, attaching the dashcam footage, incident logs, and Nurse Sarah Klein's letter. He titled the file, Delaney, Frank, Evidence of Neglect and Urgent Medical Referral. He ended his memo with a single line. If the system won't protect the men who drove our children safely through snowstorms in silence, then maybe the badge still should. Later that afternoon, Frank Delaney sat alone in his living room, blinds half drawn. The apartment was tidy, Spartan. Few personal touches save for a faded photograph on the mantel. A group of soldiers in desert gear, arms slung over each other, laughter frozen in time. One was Frank, 20 years younger, sunburnt and alive. There was a knock at the door. When Frank opened it, he found Cole standing there, shadow beside him, tail wagging. We need to talk, Cole said gently, about getting you the help you deserve. Frank blinked, eyes clouding. Am I in trouble? No, Cole replied. But some people who should have helped you might be. The snow along the sidewalks of downtown Snow Ridge had begun to gray, churned by days of boots and salt trucks, but the cold was just as sharp. It clung to the bones, a reminder that winter in this mountain town didn't pass gently. At the far end of Maple Street, where the bus depot stood quietly against the pale sky, Frank Delaney sat on a wooden bench in his parka, gloved hands trembling slightly in his lap. Shadow sat beside him, still, alert. The German Shepherd had grown especially close to Frank in the last few days. It wasn't just loyalty. It was as if Shadow saw something unspoken in him. The way Frank sat, the far-off look in his eyes, it stirred something protective in the dog's instincts. Frank was bundled well, but his breath had begun to fog unevenly, and a cold sweat clung to his brow despite the chill. His right leg twitched subtly, then more forcefully. A muffled groan slipped from his lips as he leaned forward, clutching his chest. Shadow stood instantly, letting out a low, urgent whine. He circled Frank once, then bolted down the street, snow flying under his paws. Officer Cole Danner had just parked his SUV 2 blocks away to grab coffee when he saw the blur of fur sprinting toward him. Shadow skidded to a halt in front of him, barking sharply, then turning and darting back toward the depot. Cole didn't hesitate. He dropped the coffee and ran, snow crunching beneath his boots, heart hammering. When he reached the bench, Frank was slumped to the side, barely conscious. "Frank! Frank, stay with me," Cole said, lowering him gently to the ground. Frank's lips moved, a whisper. Too loud, too bright. Cole checked his pulse, weak, but there. He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Danner. Medical emergency at the bus depot. Male, 60s, suspected cardiac episode, semi-responsive." Shadow stood a few feet away, watching with anxious eyes. The ambulance came quickly, and as the medics took over, one of them, a sturdy woman in her 40s named Carla Beecham, with sandy hair pulled into a tight braid, recognized Frank. "Delaney," she said gently, placing an oxygen mask on him. "We've seen you before, haven't we?" Frank gave a slow nod, then coughed. At the hospital, Clara Monroe arrived not long after Cole. She had driven down from Denver that morning, face chapped from the wind, eyes sharp as ever. She wore a thick military green coat and a blue VA badge around her neck. When she stepped into Frank's room, she didn't offer platitudes. Just a hand on his shoulder and a promise. "We're not leaving you behind, soldier." News of the incident spread fast in Snow Ridge, but this time, something was different. It wasn't gossip or suspicion that moved through the town. It was concern, sympathy, understanding. Cole saw it in the way the school nurse, Sarah Klein, showed up at the station that afternoon with a box of oatmeal cookies and a folder of older notes she hadn't dared to submit again. Records of Frank's irregular blood pressure, nervous episodes, letters she had tried to send to the school board. Sarah was a tall woman in her early 50s, with chestnut brown hair streaked with gray, tied in a low bun. She had an earnest, tired face and warm hazel eyes that rarely blinked when she spoke, always looking straight through to your conscience. "I should have pushed harder," she said, "but I didn't want to lose my job over something no one would read." Cole placed a hand on her arm. "You've done more than most. Help me now. We're going public." That Saturday evening, the Snow Ridge Community Hall was packed. Parents, teachers, even a few students sat bundled in winter coats beneath the dim yellow lights and creaky wooden beams. A sign on the projector screen read, "Understanding Hidden Wounds, PTSD and Community Response." Cole stood at the front, flanked by Clara Monroe and Dr. Alan Fitz, a VA psychologist who'd volunteered to speak. Dr. Fitz was in his 60s, tall with deep-set eyes and a kind smile, his gray beard trimmed neatly. He spoke in a calm, measured tone, breaking down what PTSD looked like, not in war, but in daily life, in buses, in schools, in silence. Then Cole stepped up and called on Lila Grace. The little girl walked slowly to the front. She wore a deep purple sweater dress and snow boots too large for her ankles. Her hair was braided to one side by her mother that morning, and she clutched a small plush rabbit in one hand. Her voice, when it came, was small but steady. "I called 911 because I thought something bad was happening. Not because Mr. Frank was mean. He never yelled or scared us. He just stopped. Like, all the noise made him disappear inside. He looked like my Grandpa James did before he died." The room was silent. She turned slightly to look at Cole. "I didn't want him to die." A few parents had tears in their eyes. Even Principal Hartley, seated stiffly in the second row, blinked hard and glanced down at her lap. After the meeting, a dozen people came to speak with Clara, offering donations, volunteer hours, and support. Several veterans in town had shown up too, silent men with heavy jackets and heavier memories. One of them, Robert Red Avery, a retired Marine with a thick red beard and weathered face, offered to help set up weekly group sessions. By the time Cole walked out into the snow, Shadow beside him, the town no longer felt like it was waiting to condemn someone. It felt like it had started to listen. The morning sun broke gently over Snow Ridge, casting pale golden fingers through the skeletal trees that lined the street in front of the VA clinic. The snow had stopped falling the night before, and a delicate crust of frost clung to every branch, sparkling like forgotten stars caught in daylight. On the far side of the courtyard, where the sidewalk met a line of low hedges, sat a green-painted wooden bench, chipped at the edges, but sturdy and wide. Frank Delaney sat there most mornings now. No longer behind the wheel of Bus 42, he had finally been granted paid medical leave after nearly 2 decades of uninterrupted service. His hands were gloved and resting loosely on his knees, his face thinner but softer, and his silver hair tucked beneath a knit cap that one of the nurses had handed him with a quiet smile. Shadow, the ever-loyal German shepherd, lay at his feet. His ears twitched at the sound of a passing squirrel, but he didn't move. His attention remained on Frank, as if still attuned to the man's breathing, to the occasional far-off stare that no longer brought fear, only watchfulness. Each day Lila Grace came to visit. She wore her red scarf even when the wind was still, her mittens mismatched, her backpack rattling with something sweet wrapped in foil. Today, it was oatmeal cookies with bits of chocolate her mom had baked. She plopped beside Frank on the bench without a word and handed him one. Frank took it with a small nod. Still warm? I wrapped them 3 times, Lila said matter-of-factly, pulling out a crumpled paper and a few colored pencils. Today I'm drawing you in shadow, but happy this time. Frank smiled, barely but truly. You always draw truth. Not always, she murmured, glancing down. Sometimes I wish it different. For several mornings, this had been their ritual. Frank didn't speak much, but when he did, it was with intention. Lila, with her innocence and occasional flashes of deep empathy, seemed to understand that silence wasn't rejection. It was sometimes survival. Nurses passed by with polite nods. A new therapist named Jonah Strickland had taken over Frank's sessions. Jonah was in his early 30s, biracial with warm brown eyes and tight curls under a dark beanie. He had served 2 tours himself before studying trauma psychology. His presence was calm, non-invasive. He asked, but never pushed. Jonah often glanced from his office window and saw the trio, Frank, Lila, and Shadow, huddled around a sketch pad. He once told Clara Monroe, "That girl is doing more for his healing than any textbook I've read." At home that afternoon, Lila worked on something different. Her mother, Denise Grace, was folding laundry when she found the girl hunched over the dining table with a dictionary and a notepad. Homework? Nope. Newspaper article. Denise blinked. You're 9. I asked Miss Rosenthal at school to help. She said I could submit it to the town paper if I wanted. And submit it she did. 2 days later, nestled between the town council updates and an ad for snow tires, the Snow Ridge Gazette published a short but haunting essay titled The Quiet Driver by Lila Grace. It read in part, "Some people don't yell or hit or do bad things on purpose. Some people just stop because their hearts are too full and their heads too loud. Mr. Frank didn't scare me because he was bad. He scared me because I didn't know how to help. Now I do. You sit. You bring cookies. You let them speak or not. And you stay." The piece struck something deep in the town. It was clipped and pinned to the board at the library, taped to the inside of the bus garage, and read aloud at a school assembly by Principal Hartley, her voice unsteady at times. Sarah Klein, the school nurse, teared up reading it in the teacher's lounge. "We've spent too much time looking for villains," she whispered to the custodian beside her, "and not enough time asking who needs help." Lila's teacher, Miss Rosenthal, a petite woman in her late 40s with honey blonde hair and an endless collection of shawls, asked the class if they wanted to do a class project on community empathy. The room lit up with ideas, drawings, letters to veterans, a mural of kindness. Meanwhile, Shadow had taken to walking from the police station to the clinic each morning with Cole before peeling off toward the green bench as if it were a second home. The dog had become something of a local symbol. People would smile and wave. Children would lean out of their parents' cars and shout, "Hi, Shadow," as they passed. Cole himself watched the quiet shifts happening around him with a cautious optimism. He wasn't a man easily moved by public displays. His past had carved him into someone more skeptical, but he felt it in his chest. The town was changing, softly, like snow melting into soil. One day, while Frank and Lila shared a peanut butter sandwich, Frank turned and said, "You remind me of my niece. She used to sit with me after I got back. She didn't talk much either, just sat there. Sometimes that's what you need." Lila smiled. "I can sit better than anyone in my class." At that, even Shadow thumped his tail. By the time March folded its final page, the snow in Snow Ridge had begun its slow retreat. Icicles slipped from rooftops like whispered farewells, and the frost on the grass thawed into silver threads. The morning air still held a stubborn chill, but the sun had grown more confident, climbing higher over the horizon each day. In this soft return to color and life, something else stirred gently back to its place. Frank Delaney's place in the world. He wasn't driving bus 42 anymore. That seat now belonged to a younger man named Rudy Martinez, a barrel-chested father of 4 with olive skin, always humming old jazz tunes under his breath. Rudy was kind and knew how to keep the kids laughing without letting the rules slip. But even he, in his warm, gravelly voice, had once said, "No one ever made silence feel safer than Mr. Frank did." Frank's new title was simple but powerful: Veteran Support Educator. Through a state-funded pilot called Veterans in Schools, he now visited elementary classrooms to talk about his time in service, about courage, and, most of all, about healing. Shadow sat at his feet during every session, eyes alert, tail still, head occasionally resting on a child's shoe. On his first day back, Frank wore a soft gray sweater and a deep blue collared shirt beneath a navy vest. He looked healthier, his shoulders no longer hunched, his eyes clearer behind square-framed glasses. There was still a tremble in his left hand, but he no longer hid it. Principal Hartley had greeted him at the front office, her makeup lighter, her voice softer than usual. "They've missed you, Frank, even the ones who don't know they did." That day, he entered Miss Rosenthal's third-grade class with the same quiet dignity he'd once brought to a snow-covered bus stop. Lila sat near the front, her red scarf wrapped loosely around her shoulders like a hug she'd given herself. Her backpack had changed. It was now sky blue, and, in neat embroidered letters, read, "Good people can break too, and still heal." Frank saw it. His eyes held there for a moment before lifting to hers. No words passed between them. Only a nod. As Frank began his talk, recounting his days in Fallujah, not in gory detail but in simple truths, Shadow shifted closer to him. Frank paused at one point, hand drifting to his chest, and Shadow's head leaned gently into his leg. It was enough. The pause passed. In the back of the room stood Miss Clara Townsend, a newly hired school counselor. She was in her late 30s, tall and willowy, with tightly curled auburn hair and freckles scattered like cinnamon across her pale cheeks. Her presence was warm without being intrusive. She'd been instrumental in launching the Veterans in Schools program and often reminded people, children don't just learn from facts, they learn from stories, from presence, from trust. After the talk, Lila approached Frank with a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," she mumbled, cheeks flushed. He unfolded it slowly. A single sentence sat in the middle. "Thank you for not giving up, even when it looked easier." Frank swallowed hard. "And thank you," he replied, "for staying when I didn't know how to ask." Outside, the buses lined up in their usual morning ritual. Bus 42 stood second in line, engine humming, Rudy sipping coffee from a thermos that said, #1 Grandpa. The windshield shimmered with early condensation as the sun warmed it from the east. Lila stepped aboard, waving to Rudy, and slid into her usual seat, the third one behind the driver's row. She leaned against the window, breathing slowly, her fingers warming inside purple mittens. As Rudy chatted with another student, she took a moment. She raised her hand to the frosted glass, finger extended, and slowly wrote, "You're safe now." Outside, Frank stood watching the bus line. He hadn't driven in months, but he still came every Tuesday and Thursday to walk the loading zone with Principal Hartley, who liked to say, "It's not about supervision, it's about being seen." Shadow sat next to him, wearing a new harness with a simple patch stitched to the side. Emotional support in training. Frank was teaching him to assist other veterans, with Jonah's guidance and Lila's encouragement. The dog's loyalty hadn't dulled with time. If anything, it had deepened. His presence was no longer only Frank's safety net. It was an offering to others. Cole Danner pulled up in his cruiser just as Bus 42 rumbled down Maple Lane. He stepped out, wearing his standard winter gear, gray fleece over tactical blues, and gave a slight nod. "How's it feel?" he asked, hands stuffed into his coat pockets. "Strange," Frank admitted, "like waking up from a long dream and finding you still have work to do." Cole smiled. "That's the good kind of strange." Behind them, the town of Snow Ridge stirred into its morning rhythm. Shops unlocked, teachers prepped classrooms, children with hats too big for their heads ran toward playground gates, and elderly couples held hands over coffee shop counters. No one spoke of the whispers that once haunted the town, the rumors, the fear, the misjudgment. But everyone remembered, And they remembered because of a little girl who dared to ask the wrong question for the right reason, a dog that refused to leave, and a man who taught them what quiet truly meant. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or light. They arrive in silence, in the form of a little girl's whisper, a dog's bark, or a broken man's quiet return to life. Frank didn't need saving from the world. He needed the world to see him. And perhaps that little whisper was God's way of reminding us, even the quiet ones carry battles. Even silence can be sacred. May God bless all those who carry unseen wounds. If this story touched your heart, please, leave a comment with your thoughts or prayers. Share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe to help us spread more stories that matter. And remember, sometimes a child's voice is the miracle someone's been waiting for.